dividing up. Everybody knows now that socialism is a proposal to divide up the income of the country in a new way. What you perhaps have not noticed is that the income of the country is being divided up every day and even every minute at present, and must continue to be divided up every day as long as there are two people left on earth to divide it. The only possible difference of opinion is not as to whether it shall be divided or not, but as to how much each person should have and on what conditions he should be allowed to have it. St. Paul said, "He that will not work, neither shall he eat." But as he was only a man with a low opinion of women, he forgot the babies. Babies cannot work and are shockingly greedy. But if they were not fed, there would soon be nobody left alive in the world. So that will not do. Some people imagine that because they can save money, the wealth of the world can be stored up. Stuff and nonsense. Most of the wealth that keeps us alive will not last a week. The world lives from hand to mouth. A drawing room poker will last a lifetime, but we cannot live by eating drawing room pokers. And though we do all we can to make our food keep by putting eggs into water glass, tinning salmon, freezing mutton, and turning milk into dry goods, the hard fact remains that unless most of our food is eaten within a few days of its being baked or killed, it will go stale or rotten and choke or poison us. Even our clothes will not last very long if we work hard in them. And there's the washing. You may put India rubber patches on your boot soles to prevent the soles wearing out, but then the patches will wear out. Every year must bring its own fresh harvest and its new generations of sheep and cattle. We cannot live on what is left of last year's harvest, and as next year's does not yet exist, we must live in the main on this year's, making things and using them up, sowing and reaping, brewing and baking, breeding and butchering, unless we are vegetarians like myself, soiling and washing, or else dying of dirt and starvation. What is called saving is only making bargains for the future. For instance, if I bake 101 loaves of bread, I can eat no more than the old one, and I cannot save the rest, because they will be uneatable in a week. All I can do is to bargain with somebody who wants 100 loaves to be eaten on the spot by himself and his family and persons in his employment, that if I give my 100 spare loaves to him, he will give me, say, 5 new loaves to eat every year in future. But that is not saving up the loaves. It is only a bargain between two parties. One who wants to provide for the future and another who wants to spend heavily in the present. Consequently, I cannot save until I find somebody else who wants to spend. The notion that we could all save together is silly. The truth is that only a few well off people who have more than they need can afford to provide for the future in this way. And they could not do it, or there are not others spending more than they possess. Peter must spend what Paul saves, or Paul's savings will go rotten. Between the two, nothing is saved. The nation as a whole must make its bread and eat it as it goes along. A nation which stopped working would be dead in a fortnight, even if every man, woman, and child in it had houses and lands and a million of money in the savings bank. When you see the rich man's wife, or anyone else's wife, shaking her head over the thriftlessness of the poor, because they do not all save, pity the lady's ignorance, but do not irritate the poor by repeating her nonsense to them. How much for each? You now realize that a great baking and making and serving and counting must take place every day, and that when the loaves and other things are made, they must be divided up immediately, each of us getting her or his legally appointed share. What should that share be? How much is each of us to have? And why is each of us to have that much, and neither more nor less? If the hard-working widow with 6 children is getting 2 loaves a week, whilst some idle and dissolute young bachelor is wasting enough every day to feed 6 working families for a month, is that a sensible way of dividing up? Would it not be better to give more to the widow and less to the bachelor? These questions do not settle themselves. They have to be settled by law. If the widow takes one of the bachelor's loaves, the police will put her in prison and send her children to the workhouse. They do that because there's a law that her share is only 2 loaves. That law can be repealed or altered by Parliament if the people desire it and vote accordingly. Most people, when they learn this, think the law ought to be altered. When they read in the papers that an American widow left with 1 baby boy and an allowance of 150 pounds a week to bring him up on, went to the courts to complain that it was not enough and had the allowance increased to 200, whilst other widows who had worked hard early and late all their lives and brought up large families were ending their days in the workhouse. They feel that there is something monstrously unjust, wicked, and stupid in such a dividing up, and that it must be changed. They get it changed a little by taking back some of the rich American widows' share in taxes and giving it to the poor in old age pensions and widows' pensions and unemployment doles and free elementary education and other things. But if the American widow still has more than 100 pounds a week for the keep of her baby boy, and a large income for herself besides, whilst the poor widow at the other end of the town has only 10 shillings a week pension between her and the workhouse, the difference is still so unfair that we hardly notice the change. Everybody wants a fairer division, except the people who get the best of it. And as they are only 1 in 10 of the population, and many of them recognize the injustice of their own position, we may take it that there is a general dissatisfaction with the existing daily division of wealth, and a general intention to alter it as soon as possible among those who realize that it can be altered. But you cannot alter anything unless you know what you want to alter it to. It is no use saying that it is scandalous that Mrs. A should have £1,000 a day and poor Mrs. B only half a crown. If you want the law altered, you must be prepared to say how much you think Mrs. A should have and how much Mrs. B should have. And that is where the real trouble begins. We are all ready to say that Mrs. B ought to have more and Mrs. A less. But when we are asked to say exactly how much more and how much less, some say one thing, others say another. And most of us have nothing to say at all, except perhaps that Mrs. A ought to be ashamed of herself, or that it serves Mrs. B right. People who have never thought about the matter say that the honest way is to let everyone have what she has the money to pay for, just as at present. But that does not get us out of the difficulty. It only sets us asking how the money is to be allotted. Money is only a bit of paper or a bit of metal that gives its owner a lawful claim to so much bread or beer or diamonds or motor cars or whatnot. We cannot eat money, nor drink money, nor wear money. It is the goods that money can buy that are being divided up when money is divided up. Everything is reckoned in money. And when the law gives Mrs. B her 10 shillings when she is 70 years old, and young Master A is 3,000 shillings before he is 7 minutes old. The law is dividing up the loaves and fishes, the clothes and houses, the motor cars and perambulators between them, as if it were hanging out these articles directly instead of handing out the money that buys them. No wealth without work. Before there can be any wealth to divide up, there must be labor at work. There can be no loaves without farmers and bakers. There are a few little islands thousands of miles away where men and women can lie, basking in the sun and live on the coconuts the monkeys throw down to them. But for us, there is no such possibility. Without incessant daily labor, we should starve. If anyone is idle, someone else must be working for both, or there should be nothing for either of them to eat. That was why St. Paul said, "If a man will not work, neither shall he eat." The burden of labor is imposed on us by nature, and has to be divided up as well as the wealth it produces. But the two divisions need not correspond to one another. One person can produce much more than enough to feed herself. Otherwise, the young children could not be fed. And the old people who are past work will starve. Many a woman with nothing to help her but her 2 hands has brought up a family on her own earnings and kept her aged parents into the bargain, besides making rent for a ground landlord as well. And with the help of water power, steam power, electric power, and modern machinery, labor can be so organized that one woman can turn out more than 1,000 women could turn out 150 years ago. This saving of labor by harnessing machines to nature forces like wind and water and the heat latent in core produces leisure, which also has to be divided up. If one person's labor for 10 hours can support 10 persons for a day, the 10 can arrange in several different ways. They can put the 10 hours work on one person and let the other 9 have all the leisure as well as free rations. Or they can each do 1 hour's work a day and each have 9 hours leisure. Or they can have anything between these extremes. They can also arrange that 3 of them shall work 10 hours a day each, producing enough for 30 people, so that the other 7 will not only have nothing to do, but will be able to eat enough for 14, and to keep 13 servants to wait on them, and keep the 3 up to their work into the bargain. Another possible arrangement would be that they should all work much longer every day than was necessary to keep them, on condition that they were not required to work until they were fully grown and well educated and were allowed to stop working and amuse themselves for the rest of their lives when they were 50. Scores of different arrangements are possible between out and out slavery and an equitable division of labor, leisure, and wealth. Slavery, serfdom, feudalism, capitalism, socialism, communism are all at bottom different arrangements of this division. Revolutionary history is the history of the effects of a continual struggle by persons and classes to alter the arrangement in their own favor. But for the moment, we had better stick to the question of dividing up the income the labor produces. For the utmost difference you can make between one person and another in respect of their labor or leisure is as nothing compared to the enormous difference you can make in their incomes by modern methods and machines. You cannot put more than 24 hours into a rich man's day, but you can put 24 million pounds into his pocket without asking him to lift his little finger for it. Communism. If I have made this clear to you, will you try to make up your mind how you would like to see the income of your country divided up day by day? Do not run to the socialists or the capitalists or to your favorite newspaper to make up your mind for you. They will only unsettle and bewilder you when they are not intentionally misleading you. Think it out for yourself. Conceive yourself as a national trustee with the entire income of the country placed in your hands to be distributed so as to produce the greatest social well-being for everybody in the country. By the way, you had better leave your own share and that of your children and relations and friends out of the question, lest your personal feelings upset your judgment. Some women would say, I never think of anyone else. I don't know anyone else. But that'll never do in settling social questions. Capitalism and socialism are not schemes for distributing wealth in one lady's circle only, but for distributing wealth to everybody. And as the quantity to be distributed every year is limited, if Mrs. Dixon's child or her sister's child or her dearest and oldest friend gets more, Mrs. Johnson's child or sister's child or dearest friend must get less. Mrs. Dixon must forget not only herself and her family and friends, but her class. She must imagine herself for the moment a sort of angel acting for God, without any earthly interest and affections to corrupt her integrity, concerned solely with the task of deciding how much everybody should have out of the national income for the sake of the world's greatest possible welfare and the greatest possible good of the world's soul. Of course, I know that none of us can really do this, but we must get as near it as we can. I know also that there are few things more irritating than the glibness with which people tell us to think for ourselves when they know quite well that our minds are mostly hard minds. We're only a scrap of individual mind on top. I am even prepared to be told that when you pay the price of this book, you are paying me to think for you. But is it prudent to let me impose my thoughts on you and make you believe they are your own? Beware of such shortcuts. Better let me just tell you about the thinking that has been done already on the subject by myself and others, so that you may be saved the time and trouble and disappointment of trying to find your way down blind alleys that have been thoroughly explored or found to be no thoroughfares. Here, then, are some plans that have been tried or proposed. Let us begin with the simplest. The family plan of the apostles and their followers. Among them, everybody threw all that she or he had into a common stock, and each took from it what she or he needed. The obligation to do this was so sacred that when Ananias and Sapphira kept back something for themselves, Mr. 뭐라고? Saint Peter struck them dead for lying to the Holy Ghost. This plan, which is communism in its primitive purity, is practiced to this day in small religious communities where the people live together and are all known to one another. But it is not so simple for big populations where the people do not live together and do not know each other. Even in the family, we practice it only partially. For though the father gives part of his earnings to the mother, and the children do the same when they are earning anything, and the mother buys food and places it before all of them to partake in common, yet they all keep some of their earnings back for their separate use, so that family life is not pure communism, but partly communism and partly separate property. Each member of the family does what Ananias and Sapphira did, but need not tell lies about it, although they sometimes do, because it is understood between them that the children are to keep back something for pocket money, the father for beer and tobacco, and the mother for her clothes if there is any left. Besides, family communism does not extend to the people next door. Every house has its own separate meals, and the people in the other houses do not contribute to it and have no right to share it. There are, however, exceptions to this in modern cities. Though each family buys its own beer separately, they all get their water communistically. They pay what they call a water rate into a common fund to pay for a constant supply to every house, and they all draw as much or as little water as they need. In the same way, they pay for the lighting of the streets, for paving them, for policemen to patrol them, for bridges across the rivers, and for the removal and destruction of dustbin refuse. Nobody thinks of saying, I never go out after dark. I have never called a policeman in my life. I have no business on the other side of the river. I never crossed the bridge, and therefore I will not help to pay the cost of these things. Everybody knows that town life could not exist without lighting and paving and bridges and police and sanitation, and that a bedridden invalid who never leaves the house, or a blind man whose darkness no street lamp can dispel, is as dependent on these public services for daily supplies of food and for safety and health as any healthy person. And this is as true of the army and navy as of the police force, of a lighthouse as of a street lamp, or a town hall as of the houses of parliament. They are all paid for out of the common stock made up by our rates and taxes, and they are for the benefit of everybody indiscriminately. In short, they are communistic. When we pay our rates to keep up this communism, we do not, like the apostles, throw all we have into the common stock. We make a contribution according to our means, and our means are judged by the value of the house we live in. But those who pay low contributions have just the same use of the public services as those who pay high ones, and strangers and vagrants who do not pay any contributions at all enjoy them equally. Young and old, prince and pauper, virtuous and vicious, black and white and yellow, thrift and wasteful, drunk and sober, tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, rich man, poor man, beggar man, and thief, all have the same use and enjoyment of these communistic conveniences and services which cost so much to keep up. And it works perfectly. Nobody dreams of proposing that people should not be allowed to walk down the street without paying and producing a certificate of character from two respectable householders. Yet the street costs more than any of the places you pay to go into, such as theaters or any of the places where you have to be introduced, like clubs,